Our panel today is titled Disruption as the Default, Rethinking How We Invest. We've seen a lot of people waiting for things to settle down. It'll return to a normal, survive to 25. One of our things at JLL is we're starting to see is that disruption's becoming more regular. It's every day. So today I've got a great panel where Zoe's going to lead, who's our Senior Director of Office Leasing and our Government Leasing Lead for Landlords side of JLL. We'll be moderating the conversation, and Zoe brings a deep understanding of how government and major occupiers navigate their real estate in the market now. I've also got Brian Froud, who's a director of JLL Consulting, who's going to bring a macro lens. He's got a lot of experience in scenario planning, and we can unpack what genuine risk management looks like. We've got Belinda Chung, and thank you, Belinda, for joining us. Belinda's the fund manager of the Centuria Office Fund, who's one of the major investors in Canberra, obviously brings an investor perspective to the conversation. And last but not least, we've got Ainsley Reddy, who leads across our whole of Australian government accounts leasing activities for government. Please welcome Zoe, Brian, Belinda, and Ainsley to the stage.
Thank you, Tim. I did have a little intro to share, but I probably underestimated how well AB was going to set the scene. So I think we might just skip through straight to the questions. Thank you to the panel for agreeing to be part of the conversation today. I'm very excited, and I'm sure everyone in the audience is equally as excited. Just to kick things off, I guess a question for all of you, and we might start with you, Brian. When you hear disruption as the default, what does that actually mean from your perspective?
So for those of you unaware, like consulting, we primarily work with occupiers, and we kind of have two pillars of people in place. So workplace, but then also the change involved as well. But yeah, I think talking about disruption, I think it was 2022, we're talking, planning this notion of perma-crisis. There just seems to be so many changes happening so frequently that you've got AI, COVID, climate change, and cost of living crisis. It just seems to be one thing after the other. And I think disruption is certainly the norm now. And that obviously impacts the way that we've done things over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, Ainsley and I have certainly seen that even in the just last 5 years about how people are looking to plan and manage their portfolios.
Yeah. Ainsley?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of my government colleagues and clients around the room. I think for us, uncertainty is really baked into our calendars at least once every 3 years, but it's more frequent than that. Of course, there's MOG changes, there's policy shifts. So yeah, I think what's probably changed is the velocity and probably the speed, I suppose, of change, rather than it being something that us in the government world are not necessarily used to. I think muscle memory is definitely there for dealing with change.
I think like as corporates, we're kind of stuck in this cycle of start of the year, do strategic planning, year end, do a year review, go have a lunch afterwards. But with the pace and speed of change, I don't think that's when you can sort of block end strategic planning. It needs to happen a lot more frequently and a lot fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Belinda?
I echo everything.
You got the easy answer then. You could just say, I agree with everyone.
I mean, I've got more to add to it. It's been incredibly frustrating to have so much disruptive change, but this is just the new normal. I think for us, the real focus has been on being able to adapt to this change. And for me, it's a really important part of my role, stress testing current models, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure that I've put my investors' money to best use, getting the most value out of it, and being able to pay a stable distribution at the other end. And it hasn't been easy over the last few years, as everyone has mentioned already. We've had so many pressures. And for me, the most pertinent one really has been cash rate and inflation. With all of these costs building up, it's been harder and harder to be a professional landlord. Especially in a market where office is my bread and butter. It's been incredibly difficult with market vacancies going up and COVID coinciding with probably one of the largest development cycles that we've seen over the last 20 years. So it is the new normal. It is what it is. But I think there are some great opportunities that you can find from this. Where there are ashes, there might be a phoenix rising somewhere.
Maybe. Brian, a question for you. In your opinion and in the work that you do and the conversations you're having on a daily basis, like have organizations truly accepted that uncertainty is the new norm? I know Belinda just touched on it. Or, is there still this view that people are waiting for things to return to normal?
Some, or it depends, I suppose, the
Yeah.
typical consultant answer. Um, in Australia, thinking domestically, there has been a kind of wait and see approach, particularly with the Iran conflict and cost pressures and supply chain logistics and that sort of stuff. But when we speak to our global occupiers with presence in multiple countries that are maybe more at high risk, we see a lot more interest in doing this kind of activity as scenario plan. So scenario planning isn't trying to predict the future, it's trying to imagine futures. And that just puts you in a better position for which, if any of them or one of them does land, that you actually have thought through what to do and how to do it and what will sort of change. And we worked with one global occupier working through 4 different scenarios about the Iran conflict, and we're able to sort of map out what those scenarios mean against various triggers, whether it's GDP growth, inflation, supply chain logistics, about getting either oil dependency or getting materials from there, and then the inflow costs to not only construction materials but also workforce as well, and did a whole bunch of work looking at ABS stats with insolvency and that sort of stuff. So it's all interlinked, and so usually with futures and scenario planning, you're thinking about second and third order impacts and including that in the scope. And I think global occupiers have used this as a chance to look at it a little bit more. And though Andrew's point as well about developers using scenario planning, like you can't just work on one statistic and make an assumption. You need to work on that range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with my clients, we're probably seeing there was a time where we would have a strategy and we'd move forward with that. And I think now we're halfway through and we're really having to talk about some of these challenges and why things aren't playing out the way perhaps they thought. And I'm having those discussions quite formally and informally. And I think that's been a bit of a shift. We'd sort of set a plan, we'd move forward for better or worse. But I don't think that's sticking now. And we're planning a lot more frequently.
Yeah.
A lot more frequently and a lot sooner as well. Like I know that he used to sort of 2 or 3 years out and then make a decision, but we're meeting not only with government but with corporate occupiers. I think we met with one recently. Their expiry is 2032, but with a lack of development pipeline and at the size that they need, we're meeting with them now, sort of saying this is what we need to do if we want to do a market approach. Consider a development. It's going to take 4 to 5 years, depending if it's approved or not. Right. And the reaction we're getting is, but we already made a decision not long ago. Do we really need to make this decision now again?
Yes. Again, pretty much that. I think with the first large disruption being COVID, we were very good at making bottom-up, very detailed analysis and pivoting, making a new decision. But what we realized afterwards was with every other disruption that came about, it wasn't really sustainable to go about doing that. I mean, we still do a lot of analysis, but it's the amount of analysis that we need to do. It's just so frequent. You set a strategy maybe at the start of the year, maybe you revisit it halfway through the year. That was what it used to be like, and now it's very different. From an operation perspective, you need to be very flexible in forecasting where you think things like valuations land, where rents will be, where you think incentives will land. And you have to be open to revising these numbers on a regular basis because you need to make the best decision based on the information you have at the time. And if you have information that's not up to date, it's not relevant, then your decision it's pointless.
We're definitely seeing that in our discussions in terms of the landlord leasing space where, previously we would have a number of meetings up front to talk about rents and incentives and set the forecast of where we thought buildings might land. And now our recommendation from the outset is we need to be talking about this every couple of months. We need to regroup and we need to discuss what the market's doing and how we're going to respond to how the market's changing. And we're having those discussions super regularly, as you would know. So a question for each of you, and to be honest, I wanted to scrap this question, but I got poo-pooed, and for good reason, because when we stress test this question in our panel run through, we actually got some really cool answers. So I was wrong. But should organisations fear disruption, embrace it, or prepare for it? Each of you have to pick one and explain why. Belinda, you can go first this time.
So yeah, do we pick the same one?
Well, you didn't in the run through. So that's why I was like, I was wrong. I thought this is an easy answer and it's a boring question, but I got, yeah.
Well, I'm going to pick the easy answer again, and I say you should always be prepared. You should always be prepared for it because you need to go in with your eyes open. If you're not prepared, I guess in a commercial context, one of your peers might be better prepared and get ahead of you, and you want to make sure you have that competitive advantage. Being prepared lets you see where the risks are, where the threats are, but also where the opportunities are. So it could be a chance to pivot in a slightly different direction. I'm going to use the word pivot and adapt quite a lot today because I feel like that's all I've been doing for the last 5 years.
I'm going to use the controversial one, and that's fear it. Um, that's only the first step, though, and that can be a step towards preparing. I think fear, when it comes to change and adaptability, is probably the silent majority. People are really quite vocal that they're willing and open to accept change, but we see it in workplace with activity-based working. I haven't had a desk for 10 years, but I remember when I did and got moved one time, I was a little bit peeved. But that fear happens at multiple levels too. So there's that personal impact on yourself and your family. Then it moves down to your team, then the organization, then the industry. But going through those motions with the self-awareness about what you fear and why can certainly help you better
Yep.
to prepare for it.
Okay, well, I've got acceptance. But I mean, I think it's, a good notion to have in life and in business. If you can't control certain things, you do need to accept it and you need to move on. And I think the best way to deal with that is to plan and be prepared and have a little bit of fear and hope that that guides you through. But yeah.
I might just add in here, I think you made a really good point. Also linking back to the previous question about, a lot of people have decision-making fatigue because there is a lot of disruption happening at the moment, but not making any decision is also inaction is a decision in itself. So oftentimes with, I guess, so many people in the market constantly pivoting, constantly adapting, you will inadvertently be left behind. And it may not always be a bad thing, but if everyone is rushing ahead, you really should be thinking about keeping up.
Hmm, great. Now, Belinda, one for you. How has permanent disruption fundamentally changed the way investors are assessing risk and opportunity? You would be seeing this, no doubt, day in, day out in your conversations. So, interested to hear your thoughts on that.
It's definitely impacted my job very, very significantly. Investors are worried about, I guess, every single dollar, where they put it, because, like, in a world of increasing costs, whether it be living in your personal situation, the last thing you need is your investments also falling behind. And that's something that is always front of mind for us. Investors are very conscious about yield. I think in recent times, because of all this disruption, we've seen a lot of impact to valuations. Rents less so. I think inflation is helping drive rents up, but there are elements, leasing metrics like incentives that are staying quite high. I mean, it's probably good for all the occupiers and the tenants in the room, but for all the landlords, it is something that is incredibly difficult to justify to investors. And it's something that's holding back the returns. And I guess if you look at it on a more global basis, if we have investors that are based overseas, they compare Australian real estate to other areas like US real estate, the rest of Asia, and how we compare at the moment. The yields are looking very high, but they're quite worried about the overall certainty and the direction in which the market is going because our rate of recovery seems to be slower than some of our global peers. So for them, if they are investing in Australian markets, the thing they seem to focus on now is more cash yields and the stability of the income profile.
And I think, again, this is not on my run sheet. So sorry to go rogue, but Ainsley, just on that basis, and Brian to that point as well, I guess same question from an occupier's landscape. Like, obviously, I'm close to the landlord investor side of the business, but from your perspective, this idea of permanent disruption fundamentally shifting the way occupiers are thinking, like, what are you guys seeing in that space?
I think probably the thing that jumps to mind is it's interesting you said long term because we've been seeing a lot of landlords really wanting to lock us in a lot shorter. and no options. That's probably been one of the biggest changes. But yeah, I would say that's what I'm sort of thinking right now. Maybe Brian, go on, something might spring to mind cooking as well.
I suppose
Sorry.
I'll talk from an occupier, maybe sort of the demand perspective. And when we think of occupiers and their workforce, very challenging to predict that. It used to be like, when we do workplace strategy, we can do sort of a space calculator, some assumptions of future demand. But now occupiers want much more options and visibility. So it's not just, head of HR reckons they're going to grow by this much. You actually need to predict what year on year growth looks like over 10 years at anywhere between 1% to 4%. So at least got visibility about where they need to meet that demand. But then, throw in AI and offshoring. I know we were just talking earlier about AI being sort of seen as this savior for productivity, but on the flip side, then some companies don't set usage limits and get stung with a $15 million bill from Anthropic, or
Wasn't JLL.
no, or they outsource, but then give the outsource employees access to AI, and the 500 or 1,000 US dollar tokens that each individual is using for translation and everything in between starts to reduce the actual benefits of offshoring in the first place. So, there's huge amounts of uncertainty when it comes to workforce, which then goes to impact the demand that they need when they're signing new lease agreements.
Yeah, and I think we've had a lot of focus too on just in the Commonwealth portfolios, just utilizing the space that we have in a much better way. And I think probably the flow through in certain markets is that stuff's not coming out, and that will continue into the future as well.
I think that from the landlord perspective, we are hearing a bit of that, and some, if not most, landlords will be quite accommodating to any changes in space requirements at the moment. I know we are. And what I mean by this is, for a period of time already, this would have been stretching pre-COVID as well. We started noticing that through regular engagement with tenants, that tenants do prefer to have that element of flexibility, and flexibility for them doesn't necessarily mean it's financially painful for landlords. It can be at some times, but one of the strategies that we started applying across our portfolio was putting in some flex office options within our office buildings, so that tenants, maybe they could take up less space, they have less meeting rooms on their floors, but they can use some common meeting rooms that are in buildings. And now if you look across the Canberra market, it seems pretty standard. All these new buildings actually have amazing shared facilities. End of trip, believe it or not, never used to be a standard feature, and now it is. Some of these bathrooms look much better than my bathroom at home.
One more to touch on, because I know Andrew touched on it as well with focus work, and we're talking about disruption. So let's think about disruption with focus work as well. Certainly, average meetings no more than 4 people, often 2, more often 1 now with these phone booths as well. But we're starting to see, in terms of interior design, more organizations opt for library spaces. These are open plan spaces, but with the behavior norms that people don't take calls and you can focus there and everyone can access it. And really, at the end of the day, there's additional acoustic treatment as well. But at the end of the day, it's much more efficient because you're not building walls. Easy to do, easy to make good as well at the end of the day. But starting to see a lot more prevalence of library spaces, because they want to be able to provide that balance between some focus work, some collab work when people are in the office.
Question for all of you. What's one investment assumption from 5 years ago that you no longer believe applies? And you'll have to kind of take this in your own little vortex of context, because very different answers.
I've seen there was, quite a lot of ideas around consolidation and bringing offices together, and particularly in the government space. And I think I've seen that that's probably in many ways a bit of has been problematic in some respects. Even in somewhat depressed markets, it's still quite difficult for us to locate a sizable contiguous type space. So I think thinking about whether if you don't really need to be consolidated into one large footprint, really thinking about why you would pursue that. And I certainly question some of my clients on that still today.
I think, like touching on the earlier point of flexibility, I think pre-COVID, we used to be able to assign sharing ratios for activity-based working based on teams. We can't do that anymore. It really needs to be driven by individuals. And even then, it's not going to be one size fits all. The Victorian government's enshrining into law working from home on the 1st of September. So you can't have a one size fits all office policy of 4 days a week anymore. Your Victorians will be exempt from that. So I think the flexibility as an organization and for teams and individuals, particularly through their life stages as well, those with, young kids and those in share houses, there are those moments where they want and will and use the office. And so just being aware of that and designing for that.
Yeah.
I think he's hit a very poignant point because everyone just started
Yeah.
talking.
Someone had to address the elephant in the room with Victoria State Gov.
I think, yeah, at a conference that we were at earlier this week, we spent a lot of time talking about Victoria State Government, but I'm going to steer clear from that. I'm going to talk about interest rates because it is most relevant to me. I think for a long time, we thought that the neutral interest rate should sit between 2 and 3%. And even probably up until recently, we thought that it should be going back down to there. An economist from a different agency told me last year that he thinks the cash rate will get down to 2.75%. I think right now we can safely say that that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But my honest opinion is I think the neutral rate will be higher than where we historically have seen it. And we will need to find ways to, like, how can we make new development feasible, or how do we make construction feasible so we can build things that we need to deal with the housing crisis that we're seeing at the moment. We need to find efficiencies within the real estate industry because some of these things like financing cost will probably not go down. So that's one that is quite contentious because a lot of us like to obtain a bit of, I don't know, optimism bias and hope that interest rates will come down, even, for selfish personal reasons. But I definitely think it's going to be higher for longer. And I think most economists that I've spoken to recently share the same view. And if it does go down, if it does get cut quite significantly, it means that we've got some bigger issues at hand with the economy.
But to your earlier point as well, there's opportunities there, right? Like development pipelines, there's kind of a big gap in Sydney and Melbourne. So there is opportunities for those to maybe retrofit if the finances stack up. And yeah.
I think with this is CapEx is hard at the moment. So landlords at the moment, we're dealing with a lot of different variables. Interest rate being one big variable line item in my P&L, occupancy and revenue being another one. CapEx cost is one that we're constantly having to look at and review time and time again because at a certain point in time, does it still make sense to refresh this? Does it still make sense to go through this life cycle? Can we kick out the electrification project for another year? These are things that we're constantly having to revisit because the environment around us is changing. It's changing really rapidly. So yes, whilst there is opportunities to refit and refurbish, I think everyone needs to look at the value of existing property and think about replacement costs. Replacement costs are just so high now. Construction costs itself have increased by over 40% in the last 5 years. And this is even before looking at the impact of, I guess, the supply-driven inflation increase to oil after the Middle East conflict. I think that's added on another 5%. It'll probably come back down. But having said that, even the cost to refit and refurbish is costing a lot more than it has in the past. We've looked across we've looked at a lot of data, and something that's affordable to do at a minimum, if you're refreshing something that already exists, it'll still cost you north of $1,300 per square meter. And if you're building something from scratch, say it's from warm shell, I've heard costs in Melbourne in excess of $2,500 a square meter. And that's for something it's like the Commodore of an office fit out, which no longer fits the bill for most Melbourne occupiers.
Yeah, it's exorbitant. Yeah, we're hearing the same. Just to finish up, there was a quick fire question that I had for you. So all of you need to answer this and you can mix it up so Belinda doesn't get to go last all the time. What's one thing leaders need to stop doing?
Leaders need to stop with inaction. I think they need to lead by example and they need to be innovative. I know I've probably changed my answer from what I said yesterday, Zoe. But I think in light of a lot of conversation that I've had at the conference, everyone really is looking at how they can innovate, how they can take advantage of all the changes and all the disruptions that are happening in this current market, and potentially share information with their peers so they, the rising tide lifts all boats is a saying that I truly believe in. You need to find your competitive advantage, so don't share everything. But there's an element of knowledge sharing in this environment where there are so many unknowns. There are so many peers that share the same problems, and we probably should be sharing information a lot more.
Good answer.
For me, probably stop looking backwards, start looking forwards more. I think with the speed of change, I've been in the industry 20 years. I'm sure people have been in here a little bit longer. The status quo, great for experience, understanding, benchmark, case studies, all that sort of stuff that AI can't usually give you. But need to spend more time looking forwards.
I have two great examples of leaders both here staring at me right now in the room, but I think it's about knowing who the right person is to speak with, knowing when you need to seek advice, when you need to make the decision, and really having that humility to understand that it's not about necessarily being able to predict the future. None of us can do that. But being able to say at the right time, it's time to relook at this and it's time to revisit what we thought might have been the way to move forward. So that would be my thoughts.
And final question before we do go to the audience to see if there are any questions. What's one action organisations should be taking when they wake up tomorrow morning, aside from sharing information, not looking back? And
Didn't we just answer?
yeah, kind of. I'm thinking the same thing now I've read the question.
Echoing what I mentioned before, being prepared, be curious, always go in with your eyes open, and just try to find where those risks. It's the threats and opportunities that present themselves, but only if you look a little bit deeper, look behind the headline to find out what's truly driving change or driving impact to the business. And finding a way to deal with that going forward.
I suppose mine would be maybe looking for different ways to solve problems. When I was a kid, my dad would sometimes take me to school a different way because there's research that it changes your brain chemistry. If you take the same way to work every day, your brain's kind of on autopilot when you walk in the room. But also just on the AI front, like personally, I've seen my wife's role be disrupted by AI. She was a graphic designer, had 2 kids, did a little bit of freelance work in between babies. And by the time that the youngest was starting to go to daycare, there's no freelance work. She's had to find and, retrain, which she has done. But I think there's a lot of people in this room and outside of this room that have to think a little bit differently about, how they solve problems now, how they add value.
Yeah, I think the advice I would sort of give my clients would be if something's not going the way you may have anticipated or expected or wanted, it may not be the same drivers that applied a few years ago. And I think trying to think a bit more out of the box in terms of how you're going to address certain issues is probably where we're at this point in time. And I think it's not all up to the individual. I'm a big person for collaborating, and there's so many different experts that you can go to. So I think, the problems that we're seeing pop up, they're not straightforward. They require a lot of workshopping, a lot of discussion. And I think that that's an okay and normal part of the process. And I think if you go through that process, you get a really good outcome most of the time.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you to everyone for attending today. I'm surprised Tim didn't actually give me a little bit of a dig in my intro of standing him up last year. But for those of you who were here last year, I did end up testing positive to influenza A and B, so you're all very lucky I didn't decide to come and spread my germs. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Zoe, Brian, Belinda, and Ainsley. I think that was exactly the type of grounded and honest conversation this room deserves. Obviously, days like today don't come together with all my effort. There's Anna Louise and Jasmine who've done a great job corralling the event today. Obviously, one more time, I'd like to thank Andrew Ballantyne as well as our panel for some great insights. I want to leave everyone with one thought. The theme of today has been that disruption is no longer an event, it's the environment. What strikes me about the conversations and hearing Andrew today is that the organizations that I think are going to succeed in going forward are the ones that aren't looking for certainty. It's looking and building capability to adapt and build skill sets that probably weren't there, and I'm hoping it's something that JLL can work with you to deliver to all our clients that are here today.